Bailout.
In fact, everything we've done to Pro-Business Bank was a pre-planned operation, not a bailout.
From the night of August 6th to August 7th, 2015, pursuant to the decision of the Bank of Russia and without any official orders or notifications, the interim administration, represented by the Deposit Insurance Agency, DIA, entered Pro-Business Bank, the head bank of the Life Financial Group. Almost on the same day, representatives of the interim administration showed up at Life Group's subsidiary banks. Prior to the establishment of the interim administration, there were no problems with payments. The establishment of the interim administration was accompanied by the bank's disconnection from the Banking Electronic Speed Payment System, BESP. On Monday morning, August 10th, the DIA's officials requested that the central bank reconnect the bank to the BESP system. This action didn't seem logical, considering that later it was claimed that the bank didn't have enough liquidity, meaning that if any payments were executed according to the law, the DIA would later have to contest them during bankruptcy proceedings. By that time, several days of panicking customers brought on by the BESP disconnection had naturally led to an accumulation of unfulfilled payments. In the end, they managed to reconnect Pro-Business Bank to the BESP. Further on, the interim administration, represented by the DIA, allowed payments to the tax office and the customs office, plus other payments under $50 to simulate a lack of funds in the bank's correspondent account. It was clear that some kind of a filter had been put in place. Even payroll payments didn't go through in violation of Article 855 of the Civil Code. At the same time, there were no problems with incoming bank payments. They were creating an open sack to close it later. Until August 12th, everyone was silent at 12 Niglinia Street and at the DIA. Everything was done during the holiday season, unbeknownst to the general public and most of the bank's clients.
Hello, you've reached the call center of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation. This is the Bank of Russia. How can I help you? Here's my situation. On August 7, I transferred funds from my settlement account to my counterparty. The payment order was issued. Pro-Business Bank transferred these funds to its correspondent account. However, my counterparty and their bank never received this money. I contacted Pro-Business Bank and they informed me that allegedly, what's the problem? I'm recording this conversation and I have their representative, their manager here with me. Please introduce yourself. Nariman Mamedov. Nariman Mamedov is the manager of Pro-Business Bank. He's telling me that allegedly, what did you say happened? Speak up. Payments go through with the approval of the correspondent account. Miss, what can you tell me about this? There is no information about it on your website, and no one gave me any information on your hotline. But the payments aren't going through. Tell me, what should I do? Where can I find out the truth? There's no information related to Pro-Business Bank on the Bank of Russia hotline. It should be working as usual. There's no other information on our website. You can send this question to us by mail, but at the moment, we don't have any information. So Pro-Business Bank doesn't process their clients' payments, claiming that it allegedly needs to get approval from the Deposit Insurance Agency, but the central bank has no information about it. Is that correct? No such information was made public on the central bank hotline or the Bank of Russia's website. Thank you very much. And now, where shall we call? Let's call the Deposit Insurance Agency. You're saying you're having some problems with them, right? You've reached the hotline of the Deposit Insurance Agency, a state corporation. Your call is very important to us. This is the Deposit Insurance Agency. My name is Irina. Hello. What would you like to know? Hello, Irina. My name is Viktor Viktorovich Hromov. My organization is a client of Pro-Business Bank. Since August 7, Pro-Business Bank has not been transferring funds from settlement accounts of legal entities to settlement accounts of the other legal entities. Nariman Mamedov is telling me that the Deposit Insurance Agency imposed some restrictions on the transfer of funds from the settlement accounts of Pro-Business Bank's clients. At the moment, the agency's hotline hasn't received any information concerning this bank's license being revoked by the central bank. the establishment of the interim administration, or the bank being accepted for resolution, we have no such information.
On August 12th, the central bank announced the decision to revoke the license of Pro-Business Bank and bail out Life Group's other banks. Many entrepreneurs and clients of the bank figured out that something fishy was going on, since too many things were not adding up. 5 days after the license was revoked, the DIA and the CB, apparently afraid of the protests and pickets arranged by the devastated depositors, announced that all individual depositors, along with a part of Pro-Business Bank's assets, would be transferred to BIN Bank. The regulatory agencies claimed in some mass media that legal entities shouldn't have any expectations. About $94 million in cash was transferred to PJSC BIN Bank. This was established later on the basis of documents in the court cases of the DIA's creditors. Entrepreneurs who had lost their money in Pro-Business Bank started organizing pickets. This had never happened before.
Putin, sort it out. He promised, I will wipe out the terrorists no matter where they are. I'd like to say officially, the terrorists are in the central bank's shithouse. It's about time to start wiping them out. And by the way, that's where all the corruption is, half the country in the CB. You drove small businesses to bankruptcy. Help for small business, in words only. Corruption is flourishing in the CB.
Нас ограбили по закону, нагло и очень цинично.
We were robbed in accordance with the law blatantly and cynically.
Которых мы платим зарплату.
They limited our access to our settlement accounts, which we use to pay salaries. We pay taxes, make contributions to various funds. But unfortunately, we can't influence this situation. We sent letters to everyone, to the central bank, to the DIA, to the president administration. But unfortunately, these letters just kept going around in circles. The central bank redirects the letters to the DIA, and the DIA sends them back to the CB. So, in fact, the only solution we can think of is unfortunately doing what we're doing now, going out into the streets. We don't see any other viable legal solutions. Look, it was one of the 50 largest banks. There are a few thousand banks in Russia. It wasn't some regional bank number 3000 or something. It was a large financial organization with tons of affiliates all over the country. And this bank, Pro-Business Bank, used to bail out other banks with government money. So we trusted this bank, we believed in it. The central bank issued a license to this bank, and now they're telling us about entrepreneurial risks and saying we couldn't have chosen another bank.
Могли бы выбрать другой банк, это ваше право. Финансовое оздоровление выглядит как фарс.
The bailout looks like a farce, just a farce. It's an excuse to rob banks and then say, where did this hole come from? An economic crisis. But the crisis couldn't have caused such a huge hole in one day. We're all economic actors, and we all know that yes, you can run into deficits, but you can't just lose half of your capital in one day.
Половину капитала в один день.
Further, it was leaked to the press that during the work of the interim administration, the DIA, $9.4 million was transferred from Pro-Business Bank to the DIA's subsidiary bank, Roscap. It was documented as an early repayment of credit. Due to the public outrage, Roscap had to return the money, but this $9.4 million turned out to not be the only transaction that was made, bypassing the backlog of unfulfilled payments. Much larger sums were transferred from the bank, which had practically been closed, and they would never be contested in the future, despite the public promises of the DIA's CEO, Mr. Isaev. The entrepreneurs organized joint pickets of the depositors of several banks.
Все эти люди
All these people are here today to participate in a peaceful civil protest.
гражданский протест в связи с тем, что
We're not just people who chose the wrong bank and ended up in this situation. A machine which doesn't have any logical, economic sense was put in motion. This machine is basically destroying people's lives and businesses, crippling them, breaking up their families, and plunging them into debt.
бизнеса людей калечит, разрушает семьи, загоняет людей в долги. Мы не видим никакого большого, как
We
говорится,
fail to see any
глобального
big
макроэкономического
global
смысла в том,
macroeconomic
что
sense in
сейчас
revoking
называется
banks'
Мы
licenses.
считаем, что
We believe that this scheme was implemented in order to rob the population, rob businesses under the pretext of the consolidation of the banking sector. They are robbing business.
Занимается грабежом бизнеса.
You should understand that there are other tools available, such as mergers and acquisitions, or creation of a bank for the collection of all the bad assets, so that people and businesses could peacefully switch without any losses, broken lives, nerves, strokes and heart attacks. They could peacefully switch to those banks if you wanted to bail out these banks. But you created a limbo, just a purgatory of fate. We are against this.
Грабеж!
Robbery,
Грабеж! Грабеж!
a blatant robbery.
Как говорится,
As they say, dirtiest things are done under the pretext of the best intentions. You'd think that they have created the Deposit Insurance Agency to protect people from bank failures.
От банкротства банков. Но сама процедура банкротства банков устроена так,
But the bankruptcy procedure itself is designed in such a way that any bank can be run into bankruptcy.
работы. То есть мы ушли из 90-х.
They are acting like bandits. The 90s are gone, and so are the organized crime groups. And now what? They proclaim themselves a state corporation, the DIA, and then do their evil deeds in secret.
Почему?
But most importantly, under whose order are they doing it?
Это все
Who's behind the DIA?
АСФ. ЦБ и АСФ. Воры!
The CB and the DIA are thieves.
И АСФ. Воры! АСФ. Воры!
It was all organized by Putin. It's true. Why are you surprised? They couldn't have done something like that without him.
Collective appeals concerning the abuse of rights by the CB and the DIA were filed with the General Prosecutor's Office and the MIA. The substance of the claim is the fraudulent bank bankruptcy and the falsification of the signature and date on payment orders.
I came from Yoshkar-Ola. I represent the Mariel Republic. We were scammed, our money was stolen, and I'm personally convinced that it's the central bank and the DIA's fault. I'm from Nizhny Novgorod. $10,000 disappeared from my settlement account. I came from Tatarstan, and I'd like to say that a lot of people have been affected there as well. People are outraged by this extreme situation and feel hopeless.
Из Владимира, городской центр программного...
I'm from the software center in Vladimir. We can't receive payments from schools for building sports grounds because the money got stuck in the bank. I'm an entrepreneur from Yaroslavl. Everything was fine until August 12, when one day we found out that our money has disappeared. Our country claims that it supports small businesses, but all of it was ruined in one day. You can't just take everything a person has from them. If you do it, they can despair and become dangerous. When you bureaucrats take everything from legal entities, you should remember that you're taking it not from some abstract organization, but from real people. People who work, earn money, provide for their families, feed their children. People's families and lives were ruined. Give us back what you've taken. We're not asking for anything extra. I think everyone here was affected by it. Small businesses were scammed somehow. Why?
То, что сделало государство...
What the state, represented by the CB or the DIA, did is despicable. I can't call it anything else.
Остались долги перед контрагентами,
We're left with debts to our counterparties, our employees, the tax office, and the most shocking thing is that we're supposed to pay taxes on the money that was stolen from us. This doesn't make any sense. How can we pay taxes on our losses? How?
Тех людей, вот талантливые люди, деятельные, все, которые...
They take talented, active people who are ready to invest their efforts and their energy into the national prosperity, who generate new jobs, and just dupe them.
Берут и просто под откос кидают.
What has the central bank done during these 25 years except for talking to help developing small and medium-sized business? What has it done? Nothing.
Ничего. Как грабили банки 25 лет, так и продолжают грабить.
They're just robbing banks just like they did 25 years ago. No one who works there can go public and tell me that I'm wrong. And if they can, I would like to meet them in front of TV cameras. Can they really say, "You're wrong, you're slandering us"?
Что они сделали?
What did they do? They don't respect the interests of their depositors and creditors. I don't see that. We trust our money to them, and they just rob us in broad daylight, and they don't take any responsibility. Frankly speaking, I was satisfied with this bank, so I didn't really care who the owner was. But I can say that he can be described in two ways. You could describe him as a creative person, Steve Jobs of the banking market, as they used to call him. But as I was told, I don't want to offend him. I'll leave it up to the court to decide whether he was embezzling money or not, whether he was embezzling money or not. But if we talk about this person's psychological type, I heard that he was living in his own world. He had his own ambitions, plans, etc. But I'm not ruling out that he could have broken the law somehow and then tried to cover the losses, or illegally invested money in some innovative projects and ran a deficit.
Банковские деньги вкладывал, какие-то новые инновационные проекты, там минус уходил. Но как-то не верится, что человек, который фанатичен...
But it's hard to believe that a person who is such a fantastic about his business and thinks of it as his baby pulled money from his own bank in advance just so that he could bankrupt it. Rumor has it, I won't disclose their source, but they say that shortly before the bank's license was pulled, Mr. Leontiev and Mr. Zhelezniak had a meeting with Mrs. Nabiulina, during which an argument broke out.
Конфликт словесный, где господин Леонтьев, ввиду того, что он, наверное, там...
Mr. Leontiev, who, as I was told, was a bit out there and was always very upfront, didn't quite think it through.
Считает, да, даже... Скажем так, обвинил в том, что...
He accused Mrs. Nabiulina of knowing nothing about the banking business and told her to stop interfering with him running his business. And then he got up and left. And after that, Mrs. Nabiulina told Zhelezniak that meeting is over.
Я так понял, что и банк закончился.
I guess that meant that it was over for the bank as well. It took only 2 weeks. But I think that personal grudges and ambitions shouldn't be taken public and shouldn't affect people and small and medium-sized businesses. Everyone, people like Kostin, say that our country doesn't need small and medium-sized businesses. But the same Mrs. Nabiulina claimed, we will support small and medium-sized businesses.
Кого поддержать, если вы...
But excuse me, who are you going to support if you wipe them all out? Who are you going to support? It's all just words and populism. Just populism.
Вот Герман Греф стал говорить.
Now Herman Gref started saying that Sberbank is going to lend to small businesses. I read this just yesterday. But where are these small businesses? Every year our country allocates $2 billion to support small businesses. Have any of you ever received any of this money? Has anyone ever received this support? There are so many people here. Has anyone received this support for small and medium-sized businesses from the state? Anyone? No. Has anyone received it? No. Give me back my money first. So here's what we have. $2 billion to support small and medium-sized businesses. When who knows where. They could have bailed out this bank, which is so important for small and medium-sized businesses, but instead, they just sank it. How can it be? They spend money, steal money, kill and destroy.
К чему весь популизм вообще?
What's the point of this populism?
Это все.
What's the point? I think and hope that law enforcement agencies will examine our cases with due attention. We didn't want to talk about big money being embezzled in our appeals, but I hope that law enforcement agencies will be impartial and fair and will want to investigate and find out who stole our money.
И выявить, кто на самом деле расхитил наши деньги.
All the appeals were given the runaround. The case kept bouncing between departments. There was still hope of forming a creditor committee from among the victims, but it soon disappeared. Pro-Business Bank was a part of the Life Financial Group. The main owners were Sergei Leontiev and Alexander Zhelezniak. Pro-Business Bank was one of the top 100 Russian banks, and if you consider all the banks of the Life Financial Group, the volume of its financial assets would land this group in the top 30. The Life Financial Group included several banks, the head bank, Pro-Business Bank, and subsidiary banks. They were purchased or taken up for bailout at different times and then integrated into the group. These were such banks as Express Volga, Gasenergo Bank, Vuz Bank, Paidiom Bank, the National Bank for Savings. The last one to be taken up for bailout was Solidarnost Bank. This is how it worked. All the subsidiaries opened Loro accounts, settlement accounts for themselves at Pro-Business Bank, where almost all the attracted funds were accumulated. The subsidiaries were also immediately integrated into a unified electronic cashier center. In other words, an internet banking system and a unified bank card system. In order to receive interest on the liabilities they attracted, subsidiaries de jure used these Loro accounts to issue interbank loans and receive them in the head bank, Pro-Business Bank. These Loro accounts were also used to top up correspondent accounts to meet the subsidiary credit organization's current obligations to their de jure creditors and depositors. It was a single organism. It functioned as a mechanism with connected vessels filled with liquidity. Subsidiary banks operated under a single, centralized management and could not independently handle the attracted liabilities or conduct independent banking activities. In other words, they could not invest the attracted liabilities into other sources for profit. Their task was to transfer these liabilities to Pro-Business Bank, and then Pro-Business Bank de jure handled these funds, but de facto carried out a unified economic activity. De facto, Life Group's banks are Pro-Business Bank. De facto subsidiary banks played the role of additional regional offices of Pro-Business Bank. That is, all the other banks were within Pro-Business Bank. When Pro-Business Bank's license was revoked and its de jure subsidiaries were bailed out for the sake of their creditors and depositors, a paradoxical situation occurred. Part of the group went bankrupt, and part of it, represented by the subsidiary banks, joined the third line of creditors, along with independent corporate clients of Pro-Business Bank. All the spots on the creditor committee were occupied by the new owners of the bailed-out Life Group banks, since they had an 80% share of the bank claims. At that point, it came as a surprise to the independent creditors' legal entities. All the entrepreneurs' attempts at unification were doomed from the very beginning.
If you choose 3 members of the creditor committee, it's convenient for the DIA, but not for us. Let's make it 11, and let's try to make the situation transparent. 3 or 4 banks that are present here today are claiming 1 billion. I'd like them to come out and tell us what these debts are that Pro-Business Bank created for them. According to official information, Pro-Business Bank's financial whole is smaller than that. So where did this $1 billion come from? And those are subsidiary banks of Pro-Business Bank. Mr. Chairman, respond to this and let those who are going to destroy us all with their vote today speak up. We agree. I think everyone present heard you. I can't force anyone to speak up, so if these creditors decide to do so, then fine, but if not, ask them to. You've already asked them. These are 3 loaners, creditors, who are the first in line to get $1 billion. Among them is Express Volga. You're saying that according to Pro-Business Bank's balance sheets, their shares are worth nothing. They're illiquid. Where's the logic in that? As for the shares, we'll put them up for sale. I provided my initial assessment. Anyone can purchase them. You understand why this question was asked, don't you? These banks are being bailed out now, so they're receiving money. It's a credit, an overdraft. Then please tell us who is providing this credit to them. Frankly speaking, I don't know any of the details of this bailout, so... That's interesting. You know about the obligations, but you don't know any details. Why are you twisting my words? As I said, we recognize the obligations to the bank, which transferred their funds. And as for the bailout of these banks, I have no authority to speak about it. I just said that this money is credited, but I don't want to go into an area I don't personally deal with. They are the same creditors as you, just bigger. And these bigger creditors get to decide the bank's fate, bankruptcy. These are private banks, commercial entities. The CB will help them, but who will help us? They help the banks. The CB and the DIA will save the bank's businesses, but who's going to save our businesses? Why 8.5% and not 9%? Why not 19? Why not 90? Maybe you could do 90. Why 8.5%? Why 8.5%? Why? People are still repaying their loans, so the money is coming in. This is my money, so will it be 8.6 in a month? Sure. Let us get 30% in 3 months first, and then you'll pay us a little bit every month until I get all my money, all 100%. You're talking as if I'm sitting here with your money in my pocket. Well, I'm sorry, but there's no one else I can talk to. I want my money back. It's mine, not yours. I repeat. You took it from me. I understand that you asked me to keep my emotions under control, but it's hard. I had to fire people, and these people had to go home and tell their wives that they can't feed their children anymore. Because I fired them. Because I'm a loser who doesn't know how banks' financial statements work. Was I supposed to study all this? There's the CB, there's the DIA. I can't even transfer 50,000 from my accounts. The transaction gets blocked. Blocked by you personally. You block it. I can't even transfer 50,000 of my own money. But you have no problem transferring 50 million to England or Sweden. This is my money you transferred. Mine and theirs. So the majority from the registry decided to form a bank creditors committee comprised of 3 people. According to the meeting's decision to form the bank creditors committee comprised of 3 people, this committee will include the 3 candidates who received the most votes, namely Vladimir Krasnoslobodsev, Nikolai Korchagin, and Marina Yelistratova. Who are these people? Where are they? They need to give us their contact information. These are your people, aren't they? They must come here and show their faces. It is outrageous. If they want to, they will, and if not, they won't. Why did we even have a meeting? Why? Why did we come here? Was there an absentee vote, or how did this happen? Dear creditors, I can see them, but they aren't standing up. Why don't they stand up? Are they shy? Why are they shy? I suppose because there's a conflict-filled environment, so maybe they don't want to stand up. Stand up!
The interim administration started its work disconnecting the bank from the BESP. Then, a number of assets in the bank's balance received a subjective approach and were reevaluated significantly downward, while a part of the credit portfolio was classified as junk. All these assets, including the truly toxic ones, were either written off the balance or handed over to third parties under assignment agreements at 10% of their nominal value. Thus, a financial hole of $970 million was formed in Pro-Business Bank's balance. Next, the good quality assets from Pro-Business Bank's balance were transferred to the Life Group Bank's balance, and the toxic assets from the Life Group Bank's balance were transferred to Pro-Business Bank's balance. All the Pro-Business Bank's individual depositors, along with a portion of the liquid assets valued at $375 million, were transferred to BIN Bank. After Pro-Business Bank was reconnected to the BESP, $9.4 million was transferred on a priority basis to Russian capital Roscap, the subsidiary bank of the DIA. The other banks from the Life Group received Pro-Business Bank's registry, $23 million in total, bypassing the backlog of unfulfilled payments. After the establishment and the completion of the work of the interim administration, Life Group was divided in parts. The head bank, Pro-Business Bank, was forced into bankruptcy, and its subsidiaries were bailed out. The government allocated about $1.6 billion to the bailout of the subsidiaries, while the bailout of Pro-Business Bank would only require a maximum of $625 $65 million. This would allow for not only the Life Group banks to be saved, but also at least 8,000 legal entities that had about $282 million in their accounts. Small and medium-sized businesses could have been saved from bankruptcy, but instead, the heads of the interim administrations of Life Group banks, represented by the DIA officials, made claims based on the intra-group records to Pro Business Bank and thus became majority creditors whose claims made up 80% of the claims in the creditor list. All of this despite the fact that these were intra-corporate claims which couldn't be treated on par with independent creditors' claims and should have been removed from the creditor list. Besides, it made any vote at the first meeting of creditors meaningless. In this case, the voting was purely nominal. At the same time, Pro Business Bank's independent creditors were presented with an imaginary picture of the subsidiary banks interacting with and issuing interbank credits to Pro Business Bank, allegedly under market conditions. After it went bankrupt, they lost everything. Now, their parental capital had been eroded, and the subsidiary banks were taken out of Pro Business Bank's ownership structure. Afterward, subsidiary banks were bailed out for a token sum by the banks. Carrying out their bailout, Sovcom Bank, UBRIR, SKB Bank, Cran Bank, and PJSC Zerovieshenergo Playit. The heads of the banks that were subject to bailout and their representatives occupied all the spots on the creditor committee.
Creditor committee, let's just leave and... So you're from Gazenergo Bank and you're a member of the committee. We should exchange phone numbers and all that. Excellent. I hope we can work together and you'll openly share information with us. Of course, I consider the banking sector a type of business as well, but in fact the businesses were conned and now only banks remain. So you are our only hope. I'm sorry, but that's how it is. We were conned as well. Who? You were conned? Tell us about it. Why should I? Why shouldn't you? It's amazing how everyone is so shy in here. What's going on? Why? Who conned you? How come you have 16 billion? Dear creditors, you've seen some of the members of the creditor committee. I can't wait any longer. I'd like to tell you about huge support for small and medium-sized businesses. 200,000 legal entities that consider themselves small, middle-sized, or maybe even slightly bigger businesses went out of business. Then we have 3 or 4 banks which, yes, I agree that they might have some claims. I don't know whether they are legal or not, but anyway, legal entities that were working hard and were able to grow their businesses in those 5, 7, 10 years are left with nothing, no money, and we can't prove anything. We were just kicked out of the chain. There's nothing else to say. Excuse me, but we're not some big-belly bankers. We are hardworking people who earn this money through blood and sweat, and they stole this money from us and our families.
The biographies of the new heads of the former subsidiary banks contain a lot of interesting facts. Denis Oshef. In August 2015, he joined Gazenergo Bank as the DIA's head of the interim administration. In March 2016, he received shares in SKB Bank, the bank which was bailing out Gazenergo Bank. At the same time, Denis Oshef was approved by the board of directors of Gazenergo Bank for the position of chair of the board. Gennady Izebelin. He's been working at the Ural Bank for reconstruction and development for 10 years. In 2015, he transferred to the DIA and joined Vuz Bank as head of the interim administration. On October 15th, the Ural Bank for Reconstruction and Development became the bailout authority for this bank. On February 11th, 2016, Gennady Izebelin was approved by the board of directors of Vuz Bank for the position of chair of the board. Vladimir Krasnoslobodsev. He joined Express Volga Bank as head of the interim administration and later became chair of the board of this bank. In the end, the DIA officials who took part in breaking up the Life Group Bank became the heads of former subsidiary banks of Pro Business Bank. It would also be interesting to see how the bailout authorities, that is, the beneficiaries of this raid-like scheme, were chosen. PJSC, Zerovieshenergo Playit. It has control over 1/4 of the market for the design of energy infrastructure and power generation facilities in Russia. In 2015, it acquired Cran Bank. This financial and industrial group is controlled by a little-known oligarch, Vyacheslav Arbausev. The group received $277 million for the bailout of Solidarnost Bank. Sovcom Bank is controlled by oligarch bankers, the Hatimska brothers, who enjoy great political support from the Bank of Russia and continue acquiring more and more assets in Russia's banking banking sector. Sovcom Bank received $780 million for the bailout of Express Volga Bank. SKB Bank, member of the Sonara Group of companies. The owner, pipe oligarch Dmitry Pompansky, is on the Forbes list. He received $370 million for the bailout of Gusenergo Bank, the Ural Bank for reconstruction and development. Its controlling shareholder is oligarch Igor Eltushkin, the main owner of the Russian Copper Company. He's on the Forbes list. He received $90 million for the bailout of Vuz Bank.
I'm from profit company of Vladimir. It's a very old Russian city. I've always supported the government and honest people, but what I saw here today, I have never witnessed a huge scam like this, people, and I was terrified. If someone from the government ever sees this video, I'd like to tell you guys honestly, you're making money off scammers like this, and they live off our hard-earned money. And not just our money, but the money of ordinary workers. I work with ferrous metals. Every day I work hard to provide for my children and my parents, who are already very old. I still don't know what to do, how to pay my debts and how to look into their eyes now. And how can you look into our eyes? Probably out of your assholes. I'm ashamed to live in a country like this. I really hate you.
The creditor committee is supposed to represent the legal interests of independent creditors. It's the only body that supervises the actions of an insolvency representative from the creditor's side. However, the representatives of new owners in actual fact keep all the details of the bailout operation secret. Next, a controlled bankruptcy takes place. Pro-Business Bank is turned into ruins, where all the legal entities' hopes to have their lost money returned are buried. There's no doubt that calling such measures financial rehabilitation is absurd. If we look at Gusenergo Bank's example, we'll see that Denis Oshev, who took over Gusenergo Bank immediately and without any reserve, allocated all $367 million of freshly minted money he received for the bailout to Dmitry Pompansky's business structures, namely to a few short-term business setups with authorized capital of $160 and without any collateral and guarantors. That's probably the reason Denis Oshev received minority stakes in SKB Bank. Wasn't the central bank supposed to be against the captive banking model? Obviously, that's not the case, since a central bank representative was present at the meeting of Gusenergo Bank's creditor committee, where this decision was made. But all the subsequent independent written queries by creditors concerning the voidable transactions of Pro-Business Bank with Life Group banks made to further protect their interests in court were given the runaround by the DIA's insolvency representative, Bednin, under the pretext of banking secrecy. Next, one of the subsidiaries, Paidion Bank, was resold through one of Sovcom Bank's bailout authorities, former chair of the board of Roscap Bank, Mikhail Kozalyev. Nominally, he was a bona fide purchaser, but only if you ignore the ridiculously low price of this purchase. In fact, he was one of the beneficiaries of this rating scheme. CJSC NBS was purchased for a token sum by the people behind the legal company Quorum, which arranged and carried out the bankruptcy of Pro-Business Bank. As for the actual lost assets and the assets that were transferred to Life Group banks, the DIA published a short, generalized report citing the deficiency of another $1 billion. All proposals by the insolvency representative, even the obviously unfounded ones, were met with unanimous support from this nominal creditor committee, comprised of de facto beneficiaries of the rating scheme. For example, it was decided to spend a part of the insolvent estate on confronting the initiative group of proactive creditors in arbitration courts. To do this, a separate additional contract with a staggeringly high rate of $265 per hour was made with the Quorum Company. That's how the classic rating scheme works. The captured assets are used to finance the fight against the real creditors.
Вот мы уже судимся, получается, 2,5 года и...
We've been litigating for 2.5 years, and we've seen a lot in the courts. We have overcome many obstacles.
Могу сказать следующее, что в самом начале...
At the very beginning, of course, we didn't think that we would have to litigate for so long. At the beginning, we just wanted to obtain information, but the insolvency representative refused to provide it under the pretext of banking secrecy. So first, we tried to prove the illegitimacy of this refusal in court. As long as the information was withheld from us, we were not able to protect our rights in the bankruptcy proceedings. And that's basically the point of the bankruptcy proceedings, to give active creditors and victims an opportunity to protect their rights in legal proceedings. But in reality, since the very beginning, we faced a very cold attitude from the court. Of course, they refused to provide the information to us, claiming that we didn't really need it, since we didn't make up 10% of the creditor list. But we should understand that when we're dealing with credit organizations, 10% of the creditor list is a huge sum. And sometimes you would have to unite hundreds and thousands of victims in order to get this 10%. And according to the court's opinion, if we didn't have 10%, then we didn't really need any information. Of course, we didn't agree and decided to sue. As a result, in a year or so, we were finally able to address the situation in cassation proceedings. Although it seems very suspicious and even ridiculous when the court, understanding the room was full of the affected creditors and that our position is very strong, was almost apologizing to the insolvency representative that it had to rule against him.
Извинялся перед представителем конкурсного управляющего о том, что придется выносить какое-то решение против конкурсного управляющего. Вот, ну, бог с ним, как говорится.
But anyway, stuff happens. That's not the point. We went back to the court of first instance and litigated for another year. And still, the agency only partially complied with the decision of the court. I mean, their compliance was purely formal. The court said, okay, we'll give you some information, but they ended up giving us only information that they saw fit. And if you don't have the documents, you can't prove anything in the arbitration courts.
Никакую свою позицию. We
understood that at the end of the day, litigating and expecting that agency would scrupulously and fully comply with the decisions of the court was naive, to say the least. That's why we initiated a big trial, trying to dispel our doubts and find out whether the so-called subsidiary banks had really lost significant sums of money in Pro-Business Bank, what kind of interrelations they had with Pro-Business Bank, and whether their claims were in fact corporate claims.
Каковы их реальные взаимоотношения были с Pro-Business-банком? Не были ли эти требования корпоративными, понять?
We wanted to see if there were any voidable transactions, since in normal, adequate and fair bankruptcy proceedings, usually a lot of transactions connected with affiliates are contested.
Много оспаривается сделок, связанных с аффилированными лицами.
Of course, we found grounds for this. We found a report where it was mentioned that Pro-Business Bank owed $63 million to all its subsidiary banks.
At the
same time, according to the creditor list, those banks had claims for $940 million. Thus, we were able to argue our case by citing the report, which had previously been approved by the court, as well as the agency and the central bank, and expressing reasonable doubt that the transaction amounting to $940 million could possibly be made. That's the amount of those banks' claims. Of course, we started our own legal position that we considered those transactions fictitious, but I would be lying if I said that we didn't realize that it was impossible for them to have no interrelations at all. Still, we didn't see any other way to obtain the documents we needed, so we could continue defending our rights in the bankruptcy proceedings. Our actions were once again met with fierce resistance, both from the representatives of the new owners of the subsidiary banks and from the insolvency representative. They united against us, and it took us a year to pry those documents out of them.
вытащили с них документы. И при этом они, понимая, что...
At the same time, they understood that if they told us what the debtor did with the money and what the real relations between the debtor and the subsidiary banks were, we would surely be able to formulate and defend our position much better.
Лучше выставить свою позицию и защитить свою позицию. Однако они молчали.
But they kept quiet, and one might even say they were snickering during the proceedings, knowing that the court would still secretly be on their side.
Все равно на их стороне.
But frankly speaking, we had more luck with courts of first instance than we had with higher courts. I'm talking about the Court of Appeal, the Court of Cassation, and even the Supreme Court. As we kept digging deeper and uncovering more and more things, we saw that court, which was supposed to stand above the proceedings, maintain the balance of power and take into account the creditor's interests, became to not secretly, but openly cover for our opponents. That was absurd.
Наших оппонентов, точнее. Понимаешь, абсурдность всего. То есть, получается, мы пришли...
We went to court to protect our rights and let the court make a judgment, but instead we ended up going against the court itself. It's very hard to get justice in such circumstances. In the end, we were finally able to permanently exclude our opponents, the subsidiary banks, from the creditor list and to classify them as technical recordings.
Цель была такая, конечно, мы их исключили как технические записи. We
understood that in reality they probably weren't technical, but we were trying to re-elect the creditor committee so we could get even more information and have even more grounds to further defend our interests. But what happened? The banks, together with the insolvency representative, went to the Court of Appeal, and the court granted protective measures and suspended the decision of the Court of First Instance. So we weren't able to re-elect the creditor committee. They realized that if we re-elected it, we would have more information, and it would be harder for them to confront us. I'd like to mention, for those who don't know, that in practice such protective measures are granted very rarely, especially since we weren't trying to get any money out of them. We were just trying to get information. But we weren't allowed to. Next was the appellate court hearings, and just a day before the hearing, the agency published on its website, the United Federal Registry for Bankruptcies, a message in which they claimed that the report, which was the primary basis for the decision of the Court of First Instance, and which said that the interbank debt amounted to $63 million, contained an error.
На своем сайте, на сайте ЕФРСБ, о том, что эта отчетность содержит ошибку.
But when we were just starting out proceedings in the Court of First Instance, we asked the DIA to confirm that this report was valid and didn't contain any errors, and they confirmed in the protocol that there were no errors and the report was valid. But as soon as they lost the case, they changed the report just a day before the hearing. We asked them, what happened to the other report? And the court responded on their behalf, it doesn't matter. And then the central bank, which was supposed to safeguard everyone's, including creditors and depositors, best interests, showed up at the appellate court and submitted some documents, some written explanations, and some new evidence to the Court of Appeals.
Письменные пояснения, начинает махать, какими-то новые доказательства представлять в апелляционной инстанции.
Of course, on the basis of the principle of the adversarial nature and equity of the parties, we had the right to request the court to adjourn the proceedings so that we could familiarize ourselves with the new evidence which had provided by the central bank without any valid reason.
Естественно, нам суд сразу отказывает в этом праве.
But of course, the court denied us the right and refused to adjourn the proceedings, so we didn't have an opportunity to get acquainted with the new evidence. They produced some trial balance sheets, but they were showing one document and talking about another, with completely different information that wasn't even in that document.
We tried
to ask for justification for this, because the court was supposed to get into the details of this situation and carefully examine it, especially considering the delicacy of the situation, where on the one side we had the debtor affiliates, so basically the debtor himself, and on the other, the independent creditors. So the court created the appearance of carefully examining the accounting statements and completely understanding all the peculiarities of the relationships between the debtor and its affiliates. In just half an hour, it analyzed tens of thousands of transactions and established that the position of the central bank, the deposit insurance agency, and our opponents, the subsidiary banks, was completely justified. And the court of first instance made a mistake because it was basing its decision on an incorrect report, which had been provided by the very same central bank and the DIA.
Который представил тот же Центробанк и тот же агентство в суд.
You'd think that it was bound to make the court suspicious, but we saw nothing like that. We realized that even before the hearing, they had already decided what was going to happen. It was so absurd and so blatantly obvious that there's nothing else to say about it. Apparently, they just made the same decision as they did when the bailout had just begun, to con the small and medium-sized businesses. They probably also thought that we would give up on suing them, but when it came clear that we wouldn't, the court decided that it wouldn't go into any details and would just blatantly side with the central bank, the deposit insurance agency, and the debtors' affiliates, the creditor organizations.
По страхованию вкладов, стоять на стороне аффилированных лиц должника, это кредитные организации.
Consequently, we were not able to achieve anything in the Court of Cassation either. We would come to a court hearing and feel that the court had already made its decision, regardless of what our position was and what we were going to say. That's why when, after going through 7 circles of hell, we finally reached the Supreme Court, we hoped that maybe it would make legal determinations regarding those petty squabbles at the lower level and restore the balance of the parties.
Для соблюдения баланса интересов сил сторон.
Of course, we expected a lot from the Supreme Court's decision, especially since the Supreme Court had recently been paying a lot of attention to cases involving affiliated entities and the nature of relationships between those affiliated entities and debtors.
В нашем случае, видимо, такого намерения и не было.
But apparently they weren't going to do this in our case, because as we were getting closer to the truth, the letter of the law and justice, we started seeing the following. The court turned from a legislative body into a law-making body and started coming up with new terms and new concepts in the relationships between the bankrupt entity and its affiliates.
В взаимоотношениях банкрота и аффилированных лиц.
Before our case, they always examined the relations of the parties, the affiliated entity and the debtor. But in our case, everything somehow came down to the fact that the credit organization handled their depositors, their independent clients' money. And thus, nothing in essence could be done to them.
Поэтому в этом случае практически с ними ничего делать нельзя.
You couldn't subordinate them, couldn't contest their transactions as corporate ones, couldn't remove them from the creditor list, all because they didn't handle their own money. That is, the nature of the relationships came to be called the nature of the origin of money. But here's the question, what's the source of a legal entity's money? The Supreme Court's Judge Bukina didn't consider that the source of legal entities' money is not exactly their own savings either. It's the money of our customers and suppliers. Our opponents just needed this litmus test so that in the future they could use it as an alibi and claim in all instances that the Supreme Court found that they were handling not their own money, but the money of their depositors, so you couldn't touch them and couldn't remove them from the creditor list.
Поэтому нас трогать нельзя, поэтому выводить за реестр нас нельзя. То есть
But the question is, what can we do to them then?
Что с вами можно сделать? То что получается? Верховный суд фактически своим вот таким толкованием...
In the end, such an interpretation, which had no logical or legal grounds, allowed the Supreme Court to basically grant immunity to credit organizations.
И вообще неподсудностью кредитной организации.
And when you read the rationale for the court's decision, you can't help but wonder if it was even written by the judge,
На самом деле писал ли это вообще судья?
or someone just brought this text on a USB stick and gave it to the judge or the registry of the court to read during the hearing.
И знаете, это на самом деле
And I'm not joking.
не шутка.
When they first heard the decision of the Supreme Court's Judge Bukina, who ruled in the favor, they openly laughed. They didn't even try to hide it.
Верховного суда. Они сами смеялись над этим решением.
The central bank's representative was openly laughing. I couldn't help but ask him what was so funny. When we left the courtroom, there was not really a conflict, but some tension. And when we stepped aside, he confessed to me as a human to a human. I asked him, was the decision brought in on a USB stick? And he said, yes, it was. The Supreme Court's decision.
Потому что мне кажется,
I think only the representatives of the agency could possibly believe that if the credit organization's money was actually coming from natural persons, then these credit organizations could not be held legally responsible.
То в этом случае они становятся неподсудными, эти кредитные организации.
But if you are a legal entity and you receive money as an advance payment, in exchange for which you're supposed to supply goods or equipment or provide services, then it's somehow a completely different story, and you don't have the same rights as the banks do.
Мы прекрасно понимаем, что на самом деле история про бизнес-банка это...
We are well aware that in reality the case of Pro-Business Bank is a case of large-scale corruption and abuses of bank bailout power.
Центробанк так кичится.
We are also well aware that the reason why the central bank is protecting these banks is because they clearly had a pre-existing agreement. The central bank allocated $1.6 billion to them, and there's no doubt that there were interested parties who got their hands on this money. They had some kind of arrangement, and of course they didn't expect that the legal entities would unite and stand their ground. And apparently those banks technically had a right to ask the central bank, how come? We had an agreement, and now these rascals united and want to take our money away from us.
То есть, на самом деле, весь суд превратился в некий цирк, фарс.
In fact, the court proceedings turned into a farce, during which they secretly or openly tried to, in our opinion, the court's aim was not to investigate the fraudulent scheme involving Pro-Business Bank, but to protect those who were behind the scheme and to somehow give legitimacy to what they had done.
Суд пытается прикрыть тех, кто насхематозили все это дело. Каким-то образом придать законность тому, чего они как бы сделали.
To tell the truth, to us as well as to many others, the prospects of litigating in such a court seem bleak.
Итак,
Our society already doesn't trust Russian courts.
Но мы очередной раз, несмотря на то,
And now, despite thousands of creditors, thousands of legal entities who have their employees gathering together, it once again reaffirmed for us that no one cares about us.
всем нет до этого дела.
They have their own
У них
business.
свой бизнес. Один из, наверное, самых вопиющих
One of the most outrageous facts that we were able to discover with the help of the documents we had to pry out for our opponents through the court was that a day before Pro-Business Bank's license was revoked, on the fifth day of the interim administration, represented by the DIA, $23 million were transferred from Pro-Business Bank's registry to 5 banks.
Из кассы Пробизнесбанка наличными деньгами были выданы 1 миллиард 350 миллионов 5 банкам. То есть 5 дней в то время, когда...
So during those 5 days, when legal entities were not able to pay salaries or perform any transactions, the interim administration transferred $23 million from the registry to the subsidiary banks.
Наличными.
They literally loaded money into trucks. Honestly, I'm not sure whether these trucks or all the money in them made it those banks.
Банков или нет, или в полном объеме или нет, ну не суть. Суть в другом, что...
But that's not the point. The point is not just they did it, but also that we found out about it in 3 years later. It means that the DIA kept contesting all the transactions by ordinary creditors and depositors, not particularly delving into a month ago, but they somehow ignored the fact that they basically made a transaction of $23 million. But we understand that it's just more proof of the fact that the insolvency representative shares interests with interested parties whom he's covering up, and that is why he didn't question those transactions. We understand why they weren't contested.
И мы не удивляемся, конечно, мы пытаемся уже в течение года.
And we're not surprised. We've been trying to contest these transactions for a year. However, every time the court and our opponents somehow manage to adjourn the hearings, this has been going on for a year. In other cases, when someone comes to the court to defend their interests, the court and the agency probably don't hesitate, and it only takes them half of a hearing to find the transactions voidable. But in our case, it's taking more than a year.
То в нашем случае это длится уже больше года. Мы ожидаем более сенсационного нововведения, судебный банкротный процесс.
We're expecting the introduction of a new sensational term in court bankruptcy proceedings, a socially focused transaction, meaning that when the court doesn't have any arguments and legal grounds for covering up its protégés, it starts making new laws. So naturally, we came to the conclusion that we probably won't be able to protect our rights in Russian courts. You saw what kind of forces we're going against.
Вы все видели, какие силы нам противостоят.
Moreover, the legal company Quorum, which was hired by the agency, is headed by a notorious lawyer, Pavlov, who is known for his crafty schemes.
Господином Павловым, который имеет такую двуякую репутацию, скажем так, грамотного схематозника. Я не берусь говорить, насколько он участвовал в схеме расчленения группы Life.
I can't say what role he played in breaking up the Life group. Nevertheless, we realize that going against a mighty power like the central bank, the Deposit Insurance Agency, and 4 former subsidiary credit organizations of Pro-Business Bank, backed by 4 of their bailout authorities, is hopeless. They'll just continue stretching the proceedings out, and in the end, we won't achieve anything.
Что это все закончится тем, что будут растягиваться суды до бесконечности, и мы в конечном итоге ничего не добьемся. Даже было такое, что недвусмысленно это представитель...
Once the insolvency representative, the legal company Quorum, even told us explicitly, "Why are you trying to defend your interests? This process was approved by the head of the state, and by trying to protect your rights, You're going against his will.
Свои права, вы идете против его воли. Но
But excuse me, maybe he did approve the good intention of financial rehabilitation. It is a good intention indeed. But I don't think that it means that he allowed them to do whatever they wanted. For example, to spend 1.6 billion when 625 million would suffice.
Залить 100 миллиардов там, где можно обойтись 40 миллиардами.
Even if they chose not to bail out Pro-Business Bank, but to bail out its subsidiary instead, they would be fine. But why, when they had not only a legal right, but a legal ground to remove the banks being bailed out from the creditor list, and to deal with 8,000 to 9,000 legal entities first, so that their losses could be compensated, did they just leave us out in the gutter, claiming that that's how it was supposed to be? I don't think those actions were approved.
Они оставляют нас в помойке банкрота, трактуя нам это тем, что так и должно быть. Я не думаю, что на все это им дали добро. Естественно, понятное дело, что это решение принималось.
Of course, this decision was made not by the insolvency representative, Bednin, but by someone higher up. I can't say who lobbied for such a bailout scheme for the Life Financial Group, but I realized that it was someone higher up. I think it's obvious why they did it this way. Since there are so many of us creditors who go to the courts, the representatives of former subsidiary banks in their private conversations, not in my presence of course, say things like, "We're so sick and tired of this Grigoryan, we should just get him locked up."
Как этот Григорян нам надоел, будет шить варежки где-то, посадить бы его. Я не знаю, такие недоумки.
They're making threats like this. There have been instances when, after exciting the courtroom, they would write messages saying thank you for adjourning another hearing. We don't have such capacities, and I don't think it's a correct and legal way to defend your interests. It is all just a big farce.
Выглядит один большой фарс. На самом деле,
in fact, I think the problem runs much deeper than just the Pro-Business Bank case. I can tell you this. Of course, all banks have problems for which their owners are responsible. It could be some hidden losses, illegal money transfers, or embezzlement.
Убыток прикрытый, это может быть и неправомерный вывод, и хищение денег.
But they usually make up about 15 to 20% of all assets on average. However, this procedure is designed in such a way that a lion's share of the bank's assets remains on the territory of the Russian Federation. But you shouldn't think that this money will go to the insolvent estate. This situation can be called anything, but not financial rehabilitation.
Только не финансовым оздоровлением.
We understand that the case of Pro-Business Bank is a case of large-scale corruption, big money. There is no financial rehabilitation involved, and it's not that Pro-Business Bank was perfect and never had any problems, or that its owners, Mr. Leontiev and Mr. Zhelezniak, were absolutely honest people and didn't benefit from the bank in any way.
Скажем так, абсолютно честны и там за счет банка никак не обогатились. Дело не в этом.
But that's not the point. The point is that our opponents are trying to cover up their mistakes, their schemes, with the idea that the bank has owners and they can be blamed for everything.
Скажем так, на которых можно повалить весь объем. Мы прекрасно понимаем, что
we are well aware that this situation is ambiguous. Of course, Pro-Business Bank's owners didn't leave Russia empty-handed. We think that they did take some of the money, but trying to blame all the problems on them, even in the media they are talking about the owner's subsidiary responsibility and about uncovering a big financial hole.
Даже в медийном поле, как они пытаются соответственно, показать, что они пытаются их привлечь к субсидиарной ответственности, откопали огромную дыру. Ну, условно,
But imagine, 10 rubles are missing. 2 rubles were taken by the former owners, but the remaining 8 disappeared on the territory of the Russian Federation during the work of the Deposit Insurance Agency. And now they're trying to tell us, look, the real villains are out there, and we're clean and innocent. It's a game they're playing. They're trying to claim that we're fighting the wrong people and the real culprits are abroad.
А истинные виновники находятся за границей.
I repeat that, according to our information and the documents we saw during the proceedings, the bank owners are not completely, we can't say that they're completely honest and never took any money from the bank. However, the main contradictions, most of the money is still somewhere on the territory of the Russian Federation.
Ничего не выводили из банка, мы не можем. Но, однако, основные противоречия, основные деньги осели все равно на территории Российской Федерации. Поэтому тут есть 3 стороны, на самом деле. Есть сбежавшие собственники, которые пытаются...
So we actually have 3 parties here. One is the owners who escaped and are now trying to turn the situation in their favor and claim that they're on the up and up, although we, the creditors, don't think so. Then we have the regulator, represented by the central bank, the Deposit Insurance Agency, and the company Quorum that they hired, who are trying to shift the blame for all their abuses and, I dare say, embezzlement and spending of the insolvent estate to the owners of the bank.
Растрату конкурсной массы возложить на собственников банка.
And then finally we have a third party, which is us, people who are left with huge debts and no hope of reimbursement of the money that they lost. And we're going to take into account only our own interests. I'd like to stress that our actions are not politically motivated. We're just trying to protect our rights. And we understand that it's not possible to do so in Russian courts.
Поэтому я считаю, что
That's why I believe that our decision to turn to the international court, in particular the European Court or Human Rights, is a forced measure. We were forced to do this.
это наш вынужденный шаг, нас к этому подтолкнули. Российский суд не впечатлил такой объем консолидации.
The Russian court was impressed with such a consolidation of legal entities, who justifiably went to Russian courts to protect their legitimate rights, but were unable to succeed. I think that if the huge numbers of boxes with case files, copies of powers of attorney, and proofs of authority that we submitted to the Russian courts failed to impress them, then our only hope is that such a volume of documents and such a consolidation is legal entities will impress an international court.
Впечатлит международный суд. Мы будем до конца идти и отстаивать свои права.
We'll go all the way and defend our rights. We don't want to discredit anyone, spread any political slogans, or demand anyone resignation. We don't want any of that. The only thing we want is to have the money that we lost in pro-business bank returned, so that we can pay off our debts to our customers and suppliers, who have their own employees and families just like us.
У которых тоже есть сотрудники, у которых тоже есть свои проблемы, свои семьи, точно так же, как и у нас.
If the insolvency representative, represented by the state corporation, the DIA, acted in good faith and removed the Life Group Bank's claims from the creditor list, addressing them only after the claims of all the other creditors, or if the Russian courts provided an effective way to protect the rights and interests of small and medium-sized businesses, then the insolvent estate, which amounted to more than $220 million paid to the Life Group banks during the bankruptcy proceedings, combined with almost $23 million which were illegally transferred from the bank's registry a day before the revocation of its license, would be enough to return almost 100% of all the money that disappeared in the bankrupt bank to small and medium-sized businesses. Everyone likes to talk about supporting them, but in reality,